name's David Phelps. I'm a sculptor. I've been in Oklahoma since 1980. Came here for graduate school and I went to OU and got my degree back then. I grew up on a farm in California, and I had lots of raw material in the farmyard, and at a fairly young age, my dad taught me to use the arc welder and the oxyacetylene torch, and I just started putting things together. Just all the scrap metal in the farmyard became my material to make art out of. And then when I started high school, I had my first access to a kiln and got introduced to ceramics in high school. And the ceramics continued also through college. I went to undergraduate school at Humboldt State up on the north coast of California and majored in ceramics. And then I came out to OU for graduate school and started in ceramics. And after I got into the program, I met my mentor, Ken Little, who came the semester after I did. And I gravitated towards him and ended up getting my degree in my master's in sculpture rather than ceramics. And I have an old industrial steel building that I use as a studio. It's got high ceilings, and it's over 9,000 square feet. And I rent out a quarter of the building to a fellow artist, and Beatrice Majorca. She's got her studio here as well. So I've got plenty of space, and unfortunately, I tend to never want to throw anything away, so I quickly fill the space up with junk. That's a struggle. But the tools I use most are a table saw, a radial arm saw, a bandsaw, a jigsaw, angle grinders, and then I work in oil clay a lot. A lot of my work is figurative sculpture, and so I sculpt in oil clay. And I do a lot of my own mold making, rubber mold making. So I work with wax, well, the rubber process, and I do my own waxes. And so then typically I'll get the castings back from the foundry, and if it's a large piece, the piece will be in sections, lots of sections. And so I bring those bronze panels back to the studio, and then I weld them together. And well, right now I'm working on a giant skull. It's like 4.5 times life size. I'm sculpting it in oil clay. And as soon as I'm done with the oil clay, I'll start making a rubber mold, and then I'll produce waxes in that rubber mold, take the waxes down to the foundry in Texas, and get that put together. And it's going to go to a collector here in Oklahoma City. Where this comes from for me is that my grandfather had a building he called his shop, which was really just filled with junk. But there was one cabinet that on top of the cabinet, from before I was born, there was a human skull always sitting up there, and then a Bakelite radio from probably the 40s. And the skull sometimes had a fedora on and a cigar in its mouth. And so that's what I grew up with. So that's where the fascination with the skulls come from for me. You know, a lot of my ideas come from memories and memories of events in my past and memories of emotions from my childhood. And I find that when my work is really most successful is when I can kind of dig down to those things in me deeply enough that I approach something kind of fundamentally human. And if I do that and I'm able to translate that into the work, then it seems to make a connection with people. And So I don't think I struggle with installation. In fact, that's one of the funnest parts of the whole thing is making that trip and having to plan everything out and then trust that I haven't left anything really important out of those plans, and then making the trip and then doing the installation. This last one that I sent you that video of in St. Helena, that was so much fun because it went so smoothly. I created a mock-up of this site here in my studio to get all those angles right. The main difficult part was the rails, to get the angles cut correctly on the rails. And we got there and the planning all panned out and it went together smoothly, and it was just a great feeling to have it all work so well. You know, I think for me, my biggest challenge is staying on task when I'm working alone. And I work alone a lot, and that's it for me. That's my bugaboo. It's staying on task. Well, I think this is something I learned first from a professor at Humboldt, and Stephen Daly, who's in Texas now. He was teaching a seminar class in 20th century sculpture. And one of his lectures was about how many of you studio people will be making art 1 year out of undergraduate school. And then he had all the statistics. And then how many of you will be going to graduate school? How many of you will be still making art 1 year out of graduate school and then 5 years out of graduate school? And the statistics were pretty sobering, but my takeaway from that was, well, I just have to keep making art. And then I won't be in that statistic that isn't still making art. And that's it. That's the hardest part of getting out of graduate school or undergraduate school is that's when you really have to suck it up and you have to just keep making the art. And if you keep making the art, you're going to be an artist. Well, I think that about wraps it up. I just want to thank you all for joining me on this tour of my studio.